Violence and acts of terror are spiraling out of control in Syria. The foreign-backed militant group calling itself the Free Syrian Army has now targeted high-profile personalities. Syrian officials blame Western and Arab governments for the bloodshed. They say they're ready to foil all anti-Syria plots. More in this report.
One more deadly day in Syria. Defense Minister Dawood Rajiha, his deputy Asif Shokat, and a senior security official are the latest victims of more than 16 months of unrest. They were killed after a blast hit the National Security Building in a central Rada district.
From my own understanding, if I link this to such a sophisticated attack happening in Beirut, assassinating Hariri, and at the time there is the fingerprint of Mossad and such maybe CIA-linked agents.
General Rajiha was appointed defense minister when unrest gripped Syria last year. Rajiha, a Greek Orthodox Christian, was also the deputy army chief and deputy head of the Council of Ministers. Terrorist attacks against Syrian government installations and civilians have sharply risen in recent months. The latest attack comes just days after militant groups issued a threatening warning to government forces and officials: switch your side or face assassination.
This focus on dismantling and harming the morale of the people and of the leadership and of the army.
The new Syrian defense minister, General Fahd Jassim al-Fraj, says Damascus is ready to foil all the terror plots. Al-Fraj accuses Al Jazeera and Al Arabiya TV channels of spreading blatant lies in order to destabilize Syria. On the international level, the US and Russia remain divided. Washington and its Western allies continue to put pressure on Moscow to try and push Syrian President Bashar al-Assad out of power. But Russia's not budging. Instead, it accuses the West of inciting the Syrian opposition. It's also called for the punishment of those behind the latest terror attack in Damascus.
Independent regime that Washington does not control is a regime that Washington wants replaced by a puppet state. And that's the name of the game in Syria. That's what's going on. And these insurgents, they're recruited terrorists. We can give them any name that you like. A lot of Al-Qaeda involved.
Since March last year, Syria has seized weapons, including rockets and anti-tank missiles, smuggled into the country from Lebanon and Turkey. But who's financing the project? Syria says Saudi Arabia and Qatar, with the help of Western and Israeli spy agencies. The UN says thousands have been killed in the unrest. The opposition blames the government for the killings. But Damascus says many of those who've lost their lives were civilians and security forces killed by armed gangs.
In all of the wars, direct or proxy wars, that America gets involved with, every single one of them, it's always claimed that civilian great care is taken.
To discuss that a bit further, we're joined now from Washington by Mr. James Jatras, who is a former U.S. Senate foreign policy analyst. Sir, thank you very much for joining us here on Press TV. Now, a few countries in the anti-Assad crowd have condemned today's attacks, but in the same breath that have said that this proves that President Assad must step down. How does a terrorist attack lead one to that conclusion?
It's a very good question. Obviously, there's a great deal of glee here in Washington among circles that insist that the Assad government must be removed, and it's just striking. It's stunning the extent to which the American establishment is essentially cheering on this kind of terrorism, killing government officials with this kind of terrorist bombing that has all the hallmarks of an Al-Qaeda type jihad terror operation.
Right, so, the arming of the opposition forces has always been an issue of contention from the very beginning of this crisis surrounding Syria, yet it has been sidestepped at every point by those in the anti-Assad crowd. How should one approach and view this issue?
Well, to start with, arming the insurgency in a recognized state is already an act of war. Let's be clear. The United States has acknowledged that we give non-lethal aid, whatever that constitutes, to the Syrian opposition, and we wink at the notion that some of our allies, Saudi Arabia, Qatar, Turkey, are giving lethal aid to the insurgents, really these terrorists. This is already an act of war. This is already a violation of the UN Charter and every standard of international law. And this passes without notice, without discussion here in Washington, because we get all this fluff of talk about the Syrian people and democracy and so forth. You know, here we have, you know, the murder of the defense minister. As an Orthodox Christian myself, I must say, very concerned that the top-ranking Christian in the Syrian government has been killed, and Washington is essentially cheering this on because we think our friends in the Muslim Brotherhood are going to come to power. What's amazing to me is how not only criminal this is on the one hand, but naive on the other hand, because if they really think the Muslim Brotherhood coming to power in Syria is going to serve U.S. regional interests, I think they will be very badly surprised if and when that happens.
All right, we'll have to leave it there for now. That was Mr. James Jatras, former U.S. Senate foreign policy analyst, speaking to us live from Washington. Sir, we do appreciate your insight here on Press TV.